There is a type of person who can only truly love when they stop needing to be loved. Have you ever felt that? That strange feeling of watching the whole world connect, get married, fall in love, while you stand there, paralyzed, unable to feel what should be so natural. It's not that you don't want love. You do, desperately sometimes. But every time it comes along in the wrong way, and it always comes along in the wrong way, something inside you screams, this isn't enough. And you blame yourself for it. Because while everyone else accepts, adjusts, compromises, pretends that everything is fine, you can't. You just can't betray yourself for companionship. And then comes the question that eats away at you. What's wrong with me? Why does everyone else seem to have cracked this code except you? Why do your friends find someone in 3 months and you've been in this loneliness for 3 years or 5 or 10 that no one sees but that weighs like lead? The answer you get when you dare to share this is always the same. You're too picky. You need to lower your expectations. Nobody's perfect. As if the problem were that you want too much and not that the world offers too little. But here's what no one tells you. This inability to settle for half-hearted love is not a manufacturing defect. It's a protective mechanism for your soul. Because some people aren't made for relationships of convenience, for loves that serve only as emotional crutches, for connections that exist only to fill the fear of emptiness. And you are one of those people. You carry within you a kind of hunger that cannot be satisfied with crumbs, a thirst that shallow water cannot quench. And that, as contradictory as it may seem, puts you on a lonely path. Not because you are impossible to love, but because you refuse to be loved in a superficial way. And modern society, which has turned relationships into a checklist item, doesn't know what to do with people like that. So it labels you. It calls you complicated, a perfectionist, immature, when in fact you are just too honest to lie that you are satisfied. But what if I told you that this journey, this painful journey through loneliness, through wrong encounters, through the feeling of always being out of place, is not a punishment, that there is an invisible, almost cruel reason why some souls need to cross the desert before finding real water? Because authentic love, the kind that is neither escape nor fantasy, is not born on superficial soil. It requires preparation. It requires you to be stripped of illusions, masks, and needs disguised as desire. And at the end of this video, you will understand why you are still alone, and why, as much as it hurts, it is exactly what needed to happen. Because the journey was never about finding someone. It was about finding yourself first. There is a specific kind of loneliness reserved for those who don't know how to pretend. It is not the loneliness of those who are alone because no one is interested in them. It is the loneliness of those who are alone because they refuse to live a lie. And that difference, that subtle difference, invisible to outsiders, is what makes everything heavier. Because when you see someone complaining that they are single, everyone understands. There is empathy, there is advice, there are attempts to help. But when you who could be with someone choose not to be because the connection isn't real, you become the problematic one, the complicated one, the one who can't make up their mind, the one who is afraid of commitment, the one who will never find anyone because no one is perfect. But the truth is deeper than that. You are not indecisive. You are terrified of the idea of betraying who you are, of spending your whole life with someone and still being deeply alone, of waking up at 40, at 50 and realizing that you have built your whole life on a comfortable lie. That terrifies you more than any loneliness. And that fear, that lucid and conscious fear, has a price. The price is watching everyone around you solve love while you remain stuck in a seemingly endless wait. They find someone at work, on Tinder, at their usual bar. And you remain there with that uncomfortable feeling of being out of step with the times, as if everyone else received a manual that you never read, as if there were a secret language of modern love that everyone else has mastered except you. They seem to know exactly what to say on a first date, how to create attraction, when to kiss, when to commit. And you're stuck because none of it feels natural to you. It feels like theater. And the worst part isn't being alone. The worst part is the silent shame that comes with it. Because modern society has no patience for those who take their time. We live in a culture of speed where everything has to be fast. Career, success, relationships. If you're 25, 30, 35 years old and still haven't found someone, the pitying looks begin. Questions disguised as concern, hints about opening your heart or not being so selective. As if the problem were that you were closed off and not that the world was too empty to fit inside you. And there's another burden that no one mentions. Loneliness in the midst of a crowd. You go to parties, bars, weddings, and you're surrounded by people, but you feel completely isolated. Because everyone is speaking the same language, the language of superficiality, performance, entertainment, and you can no longer pretend that it fulfills you. You listen to the conversations around you and think, how can these people be satisfied with so little? How can they not feel this emptiness? And the answer is simple. Either they don't feel it, or they've learned to numb themselves. Kierkegaard, the 19th century Danish philosopher, talked about this. He called it existential angst, that deep discomfort that arises when you refuse to live on autopilot. Most people live what he called an aesthetic existence, a life guided by social conventions, where you do what everyone else does because it's easier, safer, more accepted. Get married because it's time. Have children because it's expected. Love because loneliness is scary. But some souls like yours, can't operate that way. They need something denser, truer, riskier. They need to feel that their choices are theirs, not those of the social manual. And that, for Kierkegaard, is not weakness. It is courage. It is the refusal to live a borrowed life. It is choosing the anguish of freedom over the comfort of collective imprisonment. But this courage comes at a high price. Because while everyone else is connected, laughing in couple photos, posting romantic dinners, you are alone in a quiet apartment, wondering if you are doing the right thing or just condemning yourself to perpetual loneliness. And no one talks about it. No one talks about the emotional weight of being seen as too demanding when in fact you just can't lie to yourself. No one talks about the guilt of rejecting someone who is nice, but because you know that nice but is not love. It's conformity disguised as pragmatism. So you try to explain. You try to say that it's not arrogance, that it's not perfectionism, that you just need to feel something real. But the words always come out wrong, and you end up sounding ungrateful, immature, or worse, like someone who doesn't know what they want. But you do. You've always known. You want someone who really sees you. Someone with whom silence isn't empty, but full of presence. Someone who doesn't need you to feel whole because they already are. And who is there because they choose to be, not because they need to fill a hole. But that kind of love doesn't grow in shallow soil. It doesn't appear on an app where you have 3 seconds to impress. It doesn't show up at a party where everyone is playing an edited version of themselves. It requires time, depth, patience. And modern society hates those 3 things. It wants immediate results. It wants emotional efficiency. It wants love in fast food format. Quick, easy, disposable. So you get stuck in this limbo. Too alone by the world's standards, but too aware to accept anything. And sometimes in the quietest hours of the night, you wonder if it wouldn't be easier to give up, to let your guard down, to accept something lukewarm just to stop feeling like you're wrong, just to stop being the only one in the room who hasn't figured out that part of life. But you don't do that, because deep down, very deep down, you know, betraying yourself is death in life. It's waking up every day and looking in the mirror at a stranger. It's building a story that isn't yours. And you, as much as it hurts, prefer honest loneliness to lying love. You prefer the anguish of waiting to the betrayal of haste. And then comes the part that no one tells you, the part that changes everything. This loneliness is not abandonment. It is sorting. It is the universe, or life or chance, call it what you will, separating you from those who are still asleep. Because to truly love, you must first wake up. And waking up hurts. It's seeing that most of the relationships around you are social performances, not real connections. It's realizing that everyone's rush isn't desire, it's fear. Fear of growing old alone, fear of not being chosen, fear of facing the emptiness that exists when you take off the mask. You, for some reason you don't yet fully understand, don't have that option. You can't use someone else as emotional anesthesia. You can't pretend to be in love just so you don't have to sleep alone. And that, although it seems like a curse, is actually a brutal gift. Because it means that when you finally love, it will be real. It won't be an escape. It won't be convenience disguised as romance. It will be a conscious choice, shared vulnerability, the raw truth. But until then, you walk alone. And with every step, even without realizing it, you are being prepared. So you don't lose yourself in whoever you meet. So you don't betray who you are for fear of being alone. So you recognize the real thing when it finally appears. And that's exactly why the universe won't leave you alone. Because you're the type who needs to be prepared, not just paired up. And that preparation, it's just beginning. After so much time alone, after watching others experience what you can't feel, the universe finally sends you someone. And this time it's different. This time something clicks. For the first time in years, maybe in your entire life, you feel that chill, that irrational certainty that you found someone who embodies everything you've always wanted but never knew how to name. That person's eyes, their voice, the way they talk, the way they move through the world. Everything seems to conspire to say this is the one, finally, and you give yourself over to it. Because after so much time in the desert, any drop of water seems like a miracle. You allow yourself to dream, something you had sworn never to do again. You imagine your future together, deep conversations until dawn, comfortable silences, trips, plans. For the first time, that endless loneliness seems to have made sense, because it was preparing you for this moment, for this person. You think it was worth the wait. It was all worth it. And it's intense. It's that intensity that poets try to capture and never succeed. You feel like you're finally alive, that you finally found someone who speaks your language, who understands the layers that others didn't even know existed. It's as if you've spent your whole life talking to yourself in an empty room, and suddenly someone opens the door and responds, and the response is perfect. But then weeks go by, maybe months, and something starts to crack. Small things at first. A phrase that doesn't resonate as you expected. A silence that is uncomfortable rather than welcoming. A reaction that doesn't fit the person you had built up in your head. And you try to ignore it, because you want so badly for it to work out. You want so badly to believe that this time it's real, that you finally got it right, that the wait is over. But the feeling grows, the cracks widen, and then comes the brutal disappointment, the one that knocks you down. You realize you weren't loving that person. You were loving the idea of them, the image you projected, the broken mirror that reflected exactly what you needed to see, not what they really were. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychoanalyst, had a precise term for this: anima and animus. The anima is the unconscious feminine side present in men, the sensitivity, intuition, and emotional receptivity that they have been taught to repress. Animus is the unconscious masculine side present in women, the assertiveness, strength, and decision-making ability that they have learned to hide. And when you haven't integrated these parts of yourself, when you've buried them so deep that you don't even know they're there anymore, you project them onto someone else. You find a person who seems to embody exactly what you lack, and you confuse this complementarity with true love. But it is not love. It is fascination. It is your unconscious recognizing through the other, the part of yourself that you have not yet had the courage to embrace. It is seeing in the mirror something that has always been yours, but that you have outsourced. Think of a woman who grew up being taught to be sweet, understanding, always available. She learned that her role is to care, to welcome, never to confront. She repressed her own strength, her own anger, her ability to say no without guilt. And then she meets a man with a striking presence, decisive, almost authoritarian. Someone who takes up space without asking permission, who is not afraid of conflict, who knows exactly what he wants. And she falls in love instantly. But who did she fall in love with? Not the man himself, with all his complexity and imperfection. She fell in love with what he represents. The strength she never allowed herself to have. The courage she gave up. The power she buried in order to be accepted. She looks at him and sees liberation. But what she's actually seeing is the distorted reflection of her own power that she threw away. Or think of a man raised to be rational, controlled, always in charge. He learned early on that feeling is weakness, that vulnerability is risk, that real men don't cry, don't doubt, don't ask for help. And then he meets an intensely emotional woman who cries when she sees a sunset, who speaks openly about fear, sadness, joy, who is not ashamed to be human, and he loses himself in her, because she is everything he doesn't allow himself to be. She is the gateway to an emotional world that he locked away so long ago that he forgot it existed. And in the beginning, it's magical, because you can finally access that dormant part of yourself through the other person. The woman feels strong next to him. The man feels alive next to her. It's as if you found the missing piece of the puzzle of your soul. Finally, you are complete. But here's the problem. You're not loving a real person. You're loving a psychological function, a symbol, an idea. And when the real person starts to show up with flaws, contradictions, bad days, their own needs, human limitations, the illusion crumbles, and it crumbles fast. Why was that decisive man so attractive? He's also controlling and stubborn and sometimes unable to listen. That emotional woman who seems so profound. She's also volatile and needy and sometimes uses emotion as manipulation. Not because they're bad people, but because they're people, not archetypes, not saviors, not movie characters. Just imperfect humans trying to exist, with their shadows and scars. And when you realize this, the disappointment is devastating, because you invested everything. You gave up the security of solitude for this promise. You believed you had found your missing half, that unbearable cliché that everyone repeats as if it were sacred truth. And now you're there, looking at someone who seemed to be the answer to everything and realizing that they're not, that they never were, and worse, realizing that the problem isn't the person. The problem is that you were looking outside for what can only be found inside. Jung would say, you don't need a other half. You need to become whole. And as long as you look for what is missing in yourself in another person, you will continue to love mirrors, not people. You will continue to create idols and then destroy them when they dare to be human. I remember a story someone told me. A woman in her 30s, always independent, always the strong one in her group of friends. the one everyone turned to when they needed advice, support, structure. She never cried. She never asked for help. She never admitted weakness because weakness for her was synonymous with failure. And then she met a kind, almost fragile man. Someone who cried watching movies, who spoke openly about his insecurities, who was not ashamed to say I don't know or I'm afraid. And she fell in love with an intensity that scared her because he was everything she had repressed. Vulnerability, permission to be imperfect, to not always have the answers, to break down and be welcomed. With him, she could finally relax her armor. She could finally be fragile. But 6 months later, she left him. And when she told me why, she said something I've never forgotten. I realized I didn't love him. I loved what he allowed me to be, but I never gave myself that permission. I expected him to do the work for me that was always mine to do. And that's not love. It's emotional outsourcing. This is rare. This awareness is rare. Most people spend their entire lives jumping from projection to projection, always chasing in others what they haven't integrated within themselves. And then they blame their partner when the illusion shatters. You've changed. You're not the person I met. No, you were seeing a fantasy, a picture created by your need, not by reality. And here's the hardest truth that no one wants to hear. You can't truly love someone until you learn to love, or at least integrate in the parts of yourself that you have outsourced. If you only feel strong when you're with someone strong, you don't have strength, you have dependence. If you only feel sensitive when you're with someone sensitive, you don't have sensitivity. You're afraid to access it on your own. Jung called this process individuation, the painful, lonely, and necessary journey of becoming who you really are, integrating everything that has been repressed, denied, projected onto others. And this process doesn't happen in relationships. It happens in solitude. It happens when you're forced to face the emptiness within yourself and realize that no one, absolutely no one, can fill it for you. That completeness does not come from outside. It never has. It never will. So yes, that person who made you feel alive for the first time in years was important, but not because they were your predestined soulmate, because they were a mirror, a messenger from your unconscious, a painful reminder that you are not yet whole. And until you are, every love you find will be incomplete, fragmented, because you will be loving the reflection, not the reality, the function, not the person. And that's why so many relationships that start as fire end in cold ashes, because fire is projection. It's intensity without foundation. And when the smoke clears, when the initial chemistry evaporates, you look around and realize you were alone the whole time. Only now, there's someone by your side, equally alone. Two voids trying to fill each other, and failing. The question that changes everything is not, when will I find the right person? It is, what is still missing in me that I keep looking for in others? Because until you answer that, until you do the brutal, lonely, and non-negotiable work of completing yourself, you will continue to confuse fascination with love, projection with connection, need with genuine desire. And the universe won't spare you from this. It will send you mirror after mirror, disappointment after disappointment, until you get tired of being frustrated and finally have the courage to look inside. Because only there, in the darkness you've avoided so much, is the answer you've been looking for outside. But there's something even worse than loving someone's projection. It's finally finding someone real, someone who could truly love you, and destroying everything because your shadow won't let you. And this is where the story gets really cruel, because after going through loneliness, after learning to differentiate projection from real connection, after all that invisible work, the universe finally sends you someone different, someone who is not a mirror, someone who truly sees you with all your layers and doesn't run away, someone who could, in fact, be what you've always been looking for. And you destroy everything, not on purpose, not consciously, but you destroy it. You create distance where there was closeness. You invent problems where there were none. You test, question, doubt. You turn every gesture of affection into a possible trap. And when the person finally gives up, tired of proving what was already obvious, you're left there, alone again, wondering why you always do this. Why when the right love finally comes along, you become your own saboteur. The answer lies in the shadow. And the shadow, contrary to what many people think, is not just your bad side. It's not just anger, envy, selfishness. The shadow, according to Jung, is everything you buried because it was too dangerous to keep in the light. And that includes fear so deep that you don't even know they're there. Fear of being abandoned. Fear of not being enough. Fear of opening the dark rooms of your mind and discovering that when someone really looks inside, they'll run away. So the shadow does the dirty work for you. It protects you in the only way it knows how, by making you reject before you are rejected, by making you create chaos before real intimacy forces you to show who you really are. Because superficial relationships are safe. They don't demand anything from you. You can wear the mask, play the part, keep the walls up. But true love? That's terrifying. Because it asks you to take off your armor, and you've spent so much time protected that you don't even remember what it's like to breathe without it. Imagine you've spent years building a fortress around your heart. High walls, locked gates, deep moats. Every disappointment was another brick. Every betrayal, an extra layer of concrete. And then someone comes along and knocks on the door. Not violently but gently, and offers to come in. And your whole structure panics. Because if you open up, if you let someone see what's inside, two things can happen. Either the person stays, and you'll have to learn to live without protection. Or the person leaves, and this time it will hurt more than all the other times because you really allowed yourself to believe. Then the shadow whispers, don't risk it. It's better to end it now while it still hurts a little. And you obey. Without even realizing it, you start to sabotage. You start to interpret silences as disinterest, delays as disrespect. Anything that isn't perfection becomes proof that you were right. There is no real love, only temporary illusions. And it's better to destroy the illusion before it destroys you. I've seen this happen in ways so subtle that the person themselves doesn't notice. A woman who, every time her partner shows genuine affection, picks a fight. Not because he did something wrong, but because the vulnerability that comes with being loved is unbearable. A man who, whenever the relationship begins to deepen, finds fatal flaws in his partner. Flaws that curiously never bothered him before. Not because she changed, but because he needs an excuse to run away before it's too late. And then there are the tests. The endless and impossible tests. You create situations to see if the person will stay. You feign indifference to see if they chase after you. You act distant to check if their interest is real. And each test is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because no one, absolutely no one, can stand being tested forever. So the person eventually gets tired. And when they leave, you breathe a sigh of relief and say, I knew it. I always knew it wouldn't last. But the truth is you made sure it wouldn't last. The hardest question you can ask yourself is this. Am I running away because this person is wrong for me? Or because they're too right? Because the wrong love is easy to leave. You have clear reasons, rational justifications. But the right love? That's terrifying precisely because there's no excuse. If it goes wrong, you can't blame incompatibility, lack of chemistry, or bad timing. You can only admit that you were afraid. And that admission is brutal. Jung said that confronting the shadow is the hardest work in life. Because the shadow doesn't want to be seen. It lives between the lines, in automatic reactions, in patterns you repeat without understanding why. And when you start to illuminate it, it rebels. It creates more fear, more doubt, more reasons to run away. Because if you integrate the shadow, if you stop letting it control your choices, you lose your excuse. And then if love doesn't work out, you'll have to take responsibility. And that scares you more than any loneliness. But here's what you need to understand. Recognizing the shadow doesn't make it disappear. The fear won't evaporate. The doubt won't go away. But you can learn not to let them drive the car of your life. You can learn to feel the fear and still choose to stay. You can learn to hear the voice of the shadow saying run away and respond. Thank you for trying to protect me. But this time, I'm going to take a chance. Because in the end, the only difference between those who find true love and those who spend their lives sabotaging it is this. The courage to sit with fear without acting on it. The courage to see the shadow trying to push you away and still choose vulnerability. And that's not easy. It never will be. But it's the only way out of this cycle. So if you've ever found yourself destroying something good, if you've ever pushed away someone who truly loved you, if you've ever created problems where none existed, know that you are not flawed. You're just stuck in an internal battle that no one taught you how to win. But now that you know it exists, you can start fighting differently. You can start questioning every impulse to run away, every unnecessary test, every fear disguised as intuition. Because the next phase is even more difficult. It's when you realize that it's not enough to stop sabotaging yourself. You need to dismantle the entire identity you've built around your pain. And that will hurt more than anything that came before. There's a moment in the journey when you look in the mirror and no longer recognize the person looking back at you. Not because you've changed for the worse, but because you're finally taking off the mask. And you realize with a chill running down your spine that you've spent so much time pretending that you've forgotten who you really are. Or worse, you never knew. You were the obedient son to earn love, the strong daughter so as not to disappoint, the friend who was always available to be accepted, the impeccable professional to be valued. You built a persona so convincing that even you believed it. And now, faced with the possibility of true love, you realize that this persona no longer works. Because real love doesn't connect with masks. It demands the naked, raw, and frightening truth of who you are when no one is looking. And then comes the question that freezes the blood. If I am no longer all these things I pretended to be, who am I? Schopenhauer, the German philosopher, had a brutal view of loneliness. He said that most people are afraid of being alone because in silence they are forced to find themselves. And often they don't like what they find. That's why they fill their lives with noise, people, distractions, anything to avoid having to sit with themselves. But you were thrown into that silence. And at first it seemed like punishment. But over time you realize it's the only place where you can hear your true voice beneath all the noise you were taught to make. This phase is about demolition. It's not about fixing a few cracks or giving it a coat of paint. It's about tearing down the whole house and starting from scratch. And that's terrifying, because for years you believed that you were that house, that your identity was in those papers, in those expectations, in that narrative you told about yourself. And there's a specific trap that few people notice. You can turn pain into identity. You can start to define yourself by suffering. I am profound because I suffer. I am special because no one understands me. I am worthy because I resisted. And when pain becomes who you are, healing becomes a threat. Because if you are no longer suffering, who are you? If you are no longer the misunderstood, the lonely, the one who carries the cross, what is left? So you cling to the pain, not consciously, but you cling to it. You refuse opportunities for happiness because deep down, you are afraid of losing the only meaning your life has had so far. It's like a prisoner who spends so much time in his cell that when the door finally opens, he retreats. Freedom scares him more than the familiar bars. Jung called this individuation, the process of becoming who you really are, stripped of all the layers that family, society, and culture have placed on you. And he warned, this is the loneliest work there is, because no one can do it for you. No one can tell you who you are when you take off all your masks. You have to go down alone, find yourself alone, rebuild yourself alone. And in practice, this manifests itself in radical ways. Suddenly, you quit the stable job you always hated but kept because you were responsible. You cut ties with friends of many years because you realized that the friendship was based on who you pretended to be, not who you are. You disappoint your family by refusing the path they have laid out for you. And every choice feels like an earthquake, because to outsiders you are self-destructing. But you know the truth. You are finally stopping betraying yourself. There is a specific weight to this phase that no one mentions. Grief. You are grieving for the person you could have been if you had followed the script, for the future that will not happen, for the version of yourself that others loved, but that was never real. And grief hurts, even when it is grief for something that should never have existed. But there's something worse than pain, the loneliness that comes after. Because when you really change, when you stop pretending, a lot of people leave, not out of malice, but because they related to your mask, not to you. And when the mask comes off, they no longer know who you are. So you lose friends, you lose connections. And for a while, it seems like you've traded the security of being fake for the loneliness of being real. And you wonder if it was worth it. Let me tell you something that few people admit. At this stage, you'll feel more lost than ever. Because you've thrown away the old map, but you don't have a new one yet. You know who you are no longer, but you don't yet know completely who you are. And that's the scariest part of the journey. It's walking in the dark with no guarantee that it will work out. It's trusting that if you continue to be honest, something true will emerge. And maybe you're in that phase right now. Maybe you're looking around and realizing that your life no longer makes sense, that the things that motivated you no longer move you, that the people around you no longer see you, and you're afraid of making an irreversible mistake, afraid of ending up alone forever, afraid that in the end there is nothing but the mask. But if you're feeling this way, I need you to understand, you're not losing yourself, you are finding yourself. And this process, as painful as it may be, is the only path to true love, because you cannot be truly loved if you are hiding behind an edited version of yourself. You may be admired, desired, even needed, but not loved, because love requires real presence. And you can only be present when you stop pretending. If these words are echoing inside you, if you are realizing that you have spent years playing a role that was never yours, then you are not alone on this journey. Many souls are crossing this desert right now. And if you want to continue exploring this path, if you want to understand the next stages in more depth, subscribe to the channel, because what comes next will change how you see not only love, but life itself. And sometimes having a community that understands, even if it's invisible, makes all the difference between giving up and continuing. Rebuilding doesn't end when you get rid of the false. It only begins there. Because now comes the most counterintuitive part of all. You need to let go of the very desire you fought so hard for. After crossing the desert of loneliness, after learning to differentiate projection from real love, after confronting your shadow and dismantling all the masks, you are finally ready. You did the work. You became whole. And now finally, you can go after the love you always wanted. Right? Wrong. Because the last lesson, and the hardest one, is this. You need to let go. You need to stop searching. You need to release the very desire that brought you here. And that feels like a cosmic betrayal, as if the universe had taken you to the top of the mountain just to say, now go down, and don't look back. But here's the truth that few understand. As long as you need love to feel complete, you are empty. And emptiness attracts emptiness. Desperation attracts desperation. You can do all the therapy in the world, read all the self-help books, meditate until you levitate. But if you're still operating from a place of neediness, the love you attract will be equally needy. And two emptinesses together do not make a fullness. They make a bigger whole. Jung spoke about the difference between need and desire. When you operate from need, you are saying, I need you to complete me, to prove that I have value, to feel this emptiness that eats away at me. But when you operate from desire, you say, I am whole. And from within that wholeness, I choose to share my life with you. It seems subtle, but it's the difference between a suffocating relationship and a liberating one. And the only way to move from one state to the other is through surrender, not giving up. Surrender. Giving up is saying, I'm not going to try anymore because it's no use. It's bitterness disguised as peace. But surrendering is saying, I am whole here and now. And if love comes, it will be welcome. If it doesn't come, I am still complete. It is radical acceptance without resentment. Think of a drowning swimmer. The more he struggles, the more force he exerts, the more he sinks. Fear locks his muscles, panic consumes oxygen, and each desperate movement takes him deeper. But when he stops fighting, when he relaxes his body and trusts in natural buoyancy, he rises. Not by magic, by physics, by ceasing to fight against his own nature. Love is the same. The more you chase it, the more it runs away. The more you try to force it, control it, guarantee it, the more it slips through your fingers. But when you stop, when you let go, when you live as if you were already complete, something changes. Your energy changes. You stop exuding neediness and start radiating presence. And presence, genuine presence, without a hidden agenda, is what attracts real connection. I've seen it happen so many times that it seems like a movie script. The person who spends years desperately searching, trying all the apps, all the events, all the strategies, and finds nothing that lasts, until one day, tired, she stops. She surrenders to her own life. She starts doing what she loves for the simple pleasure of doing it. She travels alone. They take up forgotten hobbies. They build a routine that makes sense, even without anyone else in it. And it is precisely at that moment when they stop searching that they find it. Not because the universe is ironic, but because they are finally operating from the right place. They are no longer looking for someone to fill them up. They are living. And real life attracts real life. Completeness attracts completeness. But be careful. This doesn't mean pretending you don't want love. It's not about repressing desire or convincing yourself that you don't need anyone. It's about the brutal honesty of recognizing, I want love, but I don't need it to exist. I already exist. Full, imperfect, but whole. Schopenhauer said that human life is basically suffering interrupted by brief moments of satisfaction, and that the source of this suffering is incessant desire, always wanting what we don't have, always dissatisfied with what we do have. But he also offered a way out. It's not about eliminating desire. It's about changing your relationship with it. It's about wanting without depending. It's about desiring without despairing. And when you reach this state, and it's not easy, it's not quick, and it's not permanent, you'll go in and out of it several times. Something extraordinary happens. You stop testing people. You stop interpreting every gesture as a sign of the apocalypse or salvation. You simply are, present, open, but not needy. And then when you least expect it, someone appears. But not in the way you imagined. Not with fireworks and absolute certainty, but with something more subtle and more real, mutual recognition. Not because the person feels what is missing in you, but because they resonate with what is already there. It's like two instruments tuned to the same frequency. It's not completeness, it's harmony. And the difference is striking, because you no longer need to convince, prove, or hold on. You're not operating out of fear of losing. You're operating out of the joy of having found someone who walks at the same pace. What if one day your paths separate? It will hurt, of course it will, but it won't destroy you, because you didn't put your wholeness in someone else's hands. You kept it with you. So yes, the last phase is the most paradoxical. After so much work, so much waiting, so much suffering, you need to let go. You need to live as if love were already here, not in the form of a person, but in the form of a life worth living. You need to transform waiting into presence, lack into fullness, searching into rest. And when you do that, when you truly let go, not as a strategy, but as genuine surrender, you will realize something surprising. Love has always been here, not out there in someone you need to find, but here in the way you relate to yourself, to life, to the present moment. And then, if someone shows up, and maybe they will, it will be a bonus, not the condition for you to finally start living, because you are already living. And that is the only way to love without losing yourself, to surrender without betraying yourself, to be together without ceasing to be whole. But to get here, you had to go through everything that came before. And maybe now you're beginning to understand why it took so long, why you had to be alone while everyone else was connecting, why you couldn't settle for less, why every disappointment, every disillusionment, every sleepless night was necessary. Not because the universe is cruel, but because you're the type who can't love halfway. And to truly love, without fear, without a mask, without dependence, you first had to learn to be whole on your own. And then after everything, after the loneliness that separated you from the crowd, after loving mirrors and confusing them with people, after sabotaging what was real, after dismantling who you pretended to be, after letting go of the desire that consumed you, something changes. Not dramatically, not with cinematic clarity, but it changes. You wake up one day and realize you are no longer desperate. You are no longer scanning faces on the street looking for signs of connection. You are no longer interpreting every interaction as possible salvation or definitive rejection. You simply are. And for the first time in a long time, that is enough. And it is in this state, this quiet, almost imperceptible state, that something extraordinary becomes possible. You stop attracting what you always attracted. You stop repeating the same patterns. Because you are no longer the same person. Your frequency has changed. And different frequencies attract different realities. Before you entered environments carrying a silent question, who here will validate me? Who will prove to me that I have value? And that question, even if unspoken, was felt. People sense neediness, not rationally but instinctively, and neediness repels. Or it attracts other neediness, creating relationships that are more about filling holes than creating something new. But now you enter the same environments with a different energy. You're not searching, you're not proving yourself. You're simply present, living, occupying space without apologizing for existing. And that presence without an agenda is real magnetism. Not the forced magnetism of someone trying to impress, but the natural magnetism of someone who is comfortable in their own skin. And people feel it. They approach you differently, not because you've become perfect, but because you've stopped pretending to be. You allow yourself to be imperfect, human, vulnerable, but not in a needy way. Vulnerability with a solid foundation, openness without desperation. It's like the difference between a door that's been broken down and a door that's been opened by choice. Both allow entry, but one invites, the other begs. And when someone finally shows up, and someone will show up, not because the universe owes you, but because you're finally ready, the dynamic is completely different. You don't need to test them. You don't need to create drama to see if they'll stay. You don't need to constantly gauge their level of interest, seeking reassurance that you're enough, because you already know you're enough, not perfectly, but humanly. And that frees the other person too. They don't have to be your savior. They don't have to carry the weight of filling everything you believed was missing. They can just be themselves, with their own imperfections, their own fears, their own journey. And you can both walk side by side, not as desperate halves trying to form a whole, but as two wholes choosing to share the path. That's the brutal difference between love built on need and love built on choice. The first is imprisonment disguised as romance. I need you becomes a chain, not a declaration of affection. And when you need, you also resist, because no one wants to be a prisoner, not even of their own desire. So you get stuck in a cycle, wanting closeness but running away from it, desiring intimacy but fearing losing yourself in it. But when love is born of choice, when you are with someone not because you need to be, but because you want to be, because their life enriches yours, not because it fills a void, but because it expands what was already full, everything flows differently. There is room to breathe. There is permission to disagree without it meaning the end. There is freedom to be who you are, knowing that you are not being tolerated, but genuinely seen and appreciated. And perhaps for the first time, you understand what you have always been looking for. It wasn't someone to complete you. It was someone who recognized you, who looked at you and saw not the potential, not the edited version, not the promise of what you could become, but who you already are. with the cracks, the contradictions, the parts you're still learning to integrate, and who chose to stay not in spite of that, but including it. That's what changes when you make the journey. You stop looking for someone to save you and start recognizing someone to walk alongside. You stop needing to be loved to feel whole and start wanting to share your wholeness. And that subtle change, so subtle it's almost invisible, is everything. Because now if the person leaves, you don't fall apart. You feel it, of course. You suffer, obviously. Losing someone we truly love always hurts, but it doesn't destroy you, because you didn't put your existence in their hands. You kept it with you. And that means you can love fully, without reservation, without fear, without half your heart held back as insurance, knowing that no matter what happens, you remain. And there's something else. You finally understand that the journey was never about finding the right person. It was about becoming the right person, the person capable of loving without losing themselves, of giving themselves without betraying themselves, of being together without ceasing to be whole. And maybe, just maybe, all that loneliness, all that pain, all those disappointments weren't punishment. They were preparation, because you couldn't love like this before. You weren't ready. And if you had found someone in that state, you would have created the same pattern, the same toxic dynamic, the same predictable ending. But now you have a chance, not a guarantee, but a real chance. So where are you now? Perhaps in the loneliness of the first step, feeling the weight of being different, of not being able to fit into the molds that work for everyone else. Perhaps in the disappointment of the second, realizing that you loved the projection and now you have to start over, more confused than before. Perhaps in the self-sabotage of the third, destroying what could be good because fear speaks louder than hope. Perhaps in the demolition of the fourth, dismantling piece by piece who you pretended to be and feeling terror at the emptiness that remains. Perhaps in the surrender of the fifth, trying to understand how to let go without giving up. Or perhaps in the reconstruction of the sixth, realizing that something has finally changed but still unsure of what comes next. Wherever you are, I need you to know, you are not wrong, you are not behind. You are not condemned to eternal loneliness because you refuse to settle for less. In fact, you are exactly where you need to be, because each phase has its time, and rushing through stages only creates the illusion of progress while the same patterns repeat themselves in different guises. You are a rare soul, not in the sense of being superior, but in the sense of carrying within you a hunger that is not satisfied with ready-made answers, convenient loves, borrowed lives. And that has put you on a longer, lonelier, more painful journey than most. But it has also given you something that few have, the possibility of real love. Not movie love, not Instagram love, but raw, imperfect, deeply human love that only exists when two whole people choose to find each other. And if you look back now, you'll realize that it all made sense. Loneliness taught you not to betray yourself. Projection showed you what you still needed to integrate. Self-sabotage revealed the fears that ruled your life. Demolition forced you to drop masks that weren't yours. Surrender taught you that completeness doesn't come from outside. And now finally, you're ready. Not perfect, but ready. But there's something important that needs to be said. This journey isn't linear. You won't go through each phase once and be done. You'll go in and out of them. You will think you have overcome self-sabotage. And 3 months later, you will find yourself creating distance again. You will believe you are whole and suddenly feel that old emptiness coming back. And that's okay. Because growth is not a straight line, it's a spiral. You go through the same places but at different levels, with more awareness, with more tools, with more compassion for yourself. And you're not alone in this. I know it seems that way. I know that when you look around, everyone else seems to have it figured out while you're still struggling. But the truth is that many people, more than you realize, are going through exactly what you're going through right now. They just don't talk about it, because society doesn't value the process. It values the result. So everyone pretends they've already arrived, while secretly they're still halfway there. But you don't have to pretend. Not here. Not with me. Not with people who understand that true love requires inner work, time, patience, and the brutal courage to look in the mirror without looking away. And if you've made it this far, to this sentence, to this moment in the video, it's because something in you has recognized the truth. You've recognized that you're not broken. That the journey, however painful, is taking you somewhere. That it's worth continuing, even when it seems endless. So, let me ask you a question. At what stage of the journey did you recognize yourself the most? And what do you still need to let go of in order to move forward? Leave it in the comments. It doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be beautiful. It can be just a word, a number, a phrase, but leave it. Because when you put it into words, something changes. And when you see that others are going through this too, you realize you were never alone. You just thought you were. If you've made it this far, you've already taken a step beyond most people. You watch the videos. You reflect on each idea. Now the question is, how far do you want to go with this? If you want to take the next step and truly apply this knowledge to your life, the White Rabbit codes are ready for you. The link is in the video description. Remember, success is a decision. The choice is yours. Count on me and follow the White Rabbit, because in the end, it all comes down to this. You weren't waiting for the right person. You were becoming them. And now that you're ready, or at least closer than you've ever been, love no longer has to be a desperate search. It can be a conscious choice, a shared journey, a truth that finally doesn't need to be hidden. And maybe, just maybe, when you look back in a few years, you'll be grateful it took so long. For being difficult, for requiring you to cross the desert alone. Because it was there, in that silence you feared so much, that you found the only thing that really mattered, yourself. And from then on, everything, absolutely everything, became possible. The right love doesn't come when you stop waiting. It comes when you stop needing it. And now finally, you are free.